I'm ProzaicMuze, and we're kicking off the new year with a Bola Shot guide for Diablo 3's Demon Hunter class. This build overcomes the explosion delay of Bola Shot and Spike Trap by focusing on survivability in the higher monster power levels. This build is similar to a melee tank Demon Hunter, but the gameplay feels different enough that I will be making a separate guide for tanking builds using grenades or sentry. For this reason, I won't be discussing either ability. My build puts Bola Shot with volatile explosives and Spike Trap with scatter on the left and right mouse buttons. On Q, W, E, and R, we use Companion with Boar Companion, what a redundant name, Preparation with Battle Scars, Vault with Trail of Cinders, and Smokescreen with Choking Gas. We fill the passives with Brooding, Archery, and Perfectionist. This is the main build we'll explore, but an alternative build shown in the preview that I will touch on throughout the guide replaces Bola Shot's volatile explosives with Bitter Pill and Spike Trap's scatter with Echoing Blast. Before checking out some gameplay, let's talk about what our options are and just how tanky we want to be. Boar Companion is an easy choice because it's the best option for increasing your survivability without a considerable investment of hatred or discipline. The boar's damage is rather pitiful, but it is very effective at drawing aggro or getting the attention of monsters. While it is a very sturdy pet, certain affixes like Plagued or Fire Change can kill it rather quickly. In these situations, you should carefully watch the upper left corner for the icon to disappear when it dies so you can resummon it. You don't want to lose the buffs that it provides. Bat Companion is a great option for increasing your hatred regeneration and in turn your damage output, but it's unlikely you will need it unless you have a fast attack rate. It can't die, but its damage is negligible as it only attacks nearby monsters. I don't recommend using it unless you have little problem surviving and find yourself consistently low on hatred. I've only ever used it in conjunction with the passive Custom Engineering for spamming Spike Trap. Battle Scars is an amazing rune for tanking as one of the few non-barbarian heals that scales with your health. While you only need 21k health for it to be as effective as a standard healing potion, it's not an efficient rune to use unless you have 40k or more health. This is because a single item with bonus health from potions can easily increase potion healing from 12.5k to 20k plus. Having more than 40k life pushes the heal past what a single item with bonus health from potions can match. If healing isn't a problem, you can increase your damage output with Backup Plan. While it's not always reliable due to the nature of RNG, when it does proc, you can use Vault and or Smokescreen for a burst in damage and healing. This rune is rather pointless, however, if you don't have any max discipline gear, as you limit the discipline it provides each cast and increase the chance it will be on cooldown when you need it again. Punishment is another option for increasing damage, but you should only use it if you don't need extra healing and you rarely run out of discipline. It will limit your use of Vault and Smokescreen by consuming discipline in favor of continued Spike Trap use. But just like with Bat Companion, it may be overkill if your attack speed isn't high enough to use the extra hatred, or the limitation on maximum simultaneous traps prevents faster casting. In such a case, you may find a different AoE spender like Cluster Arrow more effective. Trail of Cinders turns Vault into a multifaceted ability that provides damage, healing, and mobility for a cheap spammable price. Despite the low proc rate, its rapid tick rate adds up to 200% of your total life on hit per second for each affected target. At 1000 life on hit, each tick must hit for 330k damage for the same healing at 3% lifesteal. That translates to a required 330k DPS as it deals 100% weapon damage each second it is active. Rattling Roll doesn't provide any damage or healing, but it trades this for an on-demand stun. It is incredibly spammable with the Legacy Natalia set or any other form of discipline generation. You'll find it most effective when paired with Impale and Bola Shot with their respective stun runes, allowing you to cover unsuccessful procs with guaranteed stuns. A theme for this build is the idea of simultaneously dealing damage while defending yourself. Choking Gas, like Trail of Cinders with Vault, turns Smokescreen into a damaging and healing ability, the fact that it grants invulnerability being a nice bonus. While it has a higher proc rate than Trail of Cinders and a similar function, its fewer ticks only add up to 100% of your total life on hit per second for each affected target. With the same 1000 life on hit, each tick need only hit for 167k damage for the same healing at 3% lifesteal. Unlike Trail of Cinders, you can achieve this with the lower 120k DPS as Choking Gas deals 140% weapon damage each second instead of 100%. Lingering Fog won't heal you at all, but the longer duration decreases activation cooldown for a higher uptime. This directly increases your survivability by limiting the window for taking damage between casts. This is a very popular rune for those with the Legacy Natalia set. Volatile Explosives has the largest damage radius, giving it the most reliable damage for moving targets that would normally move out of range before Bola Shot exploded. This is particularly noticeable when dealing with fast elites that frantically run about for no apparent reason. The low proc rate and large area makes a two-handed crossbow with lifesteal an ideal source of healing. Bitter Pill is just as effective against elites despite a smaller radius, but the Discipline proc emphasizes a faster attack speed to capitalize on the Vault and Smokescreen usage. It is important to note that the proc only occurs once when Bola Shot explodes, regardless of how many monsters were hit. The higher proc rate and likelihood that you will opt for attack speed makes a one-handed crossbow with life on hit a strong option. If you're running in groups, Thunderball trades Discipline generation for stuns, but it is not AoE and only hits the primary target, limiting its effective use to elites and bosses. Keep in mind that losing the Discipline proc could make it harder to maintain stuns with Rattling Roll if it's also on your bar. For this reason, I like to use the one-handed crossbow Dawn for its built-in stun chance that applies to Thunderball's AoE explosions. With proper use, Scatter will be your largest source of damage and burst healing. This is because you can clump all three traps for a combined 825% AoE weapon damage. The proc rate is per trap, meaning a potential for 150% of your life on hit for any monster hit by all three traps. The 1.2 second fuse delay acts like a cooldown though, meaning that your damage output is maximized with a two-handed crossbow. It is effective with life on hit or lifesteal, but the large damage percentage allows you to use lifesteal with DPS as low as 30k. Echoing Blast is much easier to use, but you have to cast it 3 times before its damage output will match a properly clumped Scatter. This taxes your hatred as Scatter deals full damage each cast with an enforced delay between casts, while Echoing Blast partially ignores this delay, burning through your hatred as it ramps up. It also suffers from its poor proc rate as all 3 blasts add up to a single trap from Scatter, meaning that 3 casts of Echoing Blast equals 1 cast of Scatter in terms of healing from life on hit. Lifesteal is the only way to match healing with the same amount of hatred. Archery and Perfectionist are probably your best options for passives in both builds we'll cover, as Archery adds damage to two-handers and crit chance for Discipline procs to one-handers, while Perfectionist decreases the cost of Vault, Smokescreen, and Preparation with added defensive stats. I use Brooding to make use of my large health pool, but it's entirely replaceable if survivability isn't a problem. Night Stalker doubles up on Bitter Pill's Discipline generation and can also proc from Vault and Smokescreen. The crit bonus from Archery and naturally faster attack rates make one-handed crossbows the most effective way to generate procs. It also pairs well with Echoing Blast, as the multiple blasts spread out the chances for procs to avoid the chance that you have full Discipline and waste a proc. If you're using Scatter, custom engineering is something worth trying at least once to see if you have the hatred generation to support it. I don't recommend using it with Echoing Blast, as 6 traps cost 180 hatred, while Scatter reaches 6 traps in just 2 casts or 60 hatred. The two-handed crossbow you should be using with Scatter becomes doubly important as it minimizes your rate of hatred consumption to allow the use of this passive. If you can sustain the hatred cost, this will effectively double your trap damage. You might be wondering why I don't include Vengeance, and it's as simple as reliability. If you want to tackle higher monster power levels, health globes aren't going to drop as frequently. Its effectiveness is directly tied to how fast you kill things, while Night Stalker is effective all the time. Now let's talk about the mechanics you should know in order to use these builds. Boar Companion is about as straightforward as you can get. You cast the spell, and out pops an ugly purple boar from WoW, and it hits stuff. As mentioned earlier, the only thing to remember is that it can die, requiring you to cast it again for its juicy buffs. As you get comfortable with your healing limits, you'll know when you need to hit the emergency button and top off with Preparation. When that happens, it's important that you don't waste Discipline by being full. We are using Battle Scars for its healing, but that doesn't mean you can't be efficient about it. Using Smokescreen immediately beforehand will enable you to dump any remaining Discipline vaulting and then heal. You drop a significant amount of damage, set up several dot healing sources, and refill both Discipline and health without wasting anything. Vault is an important part of this build that allows you to move about with minimal damage loss. Trail of Cinders creates a large patch on the ground that paths around corners or walls, making it perfectly suited for handling waller or sharp turns. Vault also ignores monster collision, allowing for excessively flamboyant entrances into tightly packed spaces with monsters that anxiously await their impending deaths, assuming you care enough to kill them at all. Trail of Cinders is also a respectable source of damage if you're moving a lot. The patches overlap for stackable damage and healing. You might find this an excellent method of skipping over trash while still killing them if you're farming Monster Power 1 with top gear. This damage is most apparent when faced with molten elites that just want to watch the world burn, or an arcane pack that constantly drops those space-agey, death-inducing pinkish-purple lasers that somehow found their way into our beloved Diablo universe. Of course, in the tradition of doubling it, why not both? Even if you don't like Trail of Cinders, Vault is still a very useful rune as it allows you to break Jailer. This isn't always necessary, but there will eventually be a time when you'd rather be standing somewhere else when the bars drop. Smokescreen plays a similar role to Vault in that it breaks Jailer, but it also extends to Freeze and Nightmare. You don't have to wait to be rooted though, and can use it proactively to avoid being trapped in the first place. Because its role overlaps somewhat with Vault, I use it primarily when I don't want to move, which is important if you don't have ideal trap placement or positioning. An easy rule of thumb is that Vault is for ranged packs and dodging, while Smokescreen is for melee packs and tanking, each providing a small boost in damage output. Bola Shot is a whole new beast that will take time to get used to. The base AoE radius is nice, but Volatile Explosives pushes it to fill the majority of most rooms and hallways, the actual damage radius being slightly larger than the visual explosion. This makes it fairly easy to mop up trash running an elite pack. An easy habit to develop though is the fire and forget mentality. This is a bad idea, as we'll discuss in a moment. One occasionally useful way of skipping the fuse delay is to hit doors or barrels. The immediate explosion could prove useful when you really need that last hit before you die. Now, one drawback you may have noticed is the potential for wasting shots when hitting the same target repeatedly. If that target dies, any attached bolas that haven't exploded yet vanish with them. This requires you to switch targets between shots to minimize what can be considered blank rounds. This is most important if using Bitter Pill, as blank rounds can't proc Discipline. Unlike many other abilities though, shielding isn't a problem as the bolas still attach and explode to damage monsters around the shielded target. In this case, the monster is unlikely to die before your bolas explode and you can safely stack them. Just keep in mind that the faster your attack speed is and the lower the health of your target, the greater your chance of blank rounds. The most important ability to master in this build is easily Spike Trap with Scatter. The range extends to the edges of your screen but collides with objects and the wall or affix. You can use this to your advantage to clump traps together for incredibly AoE burst damage. The first method of doing this involves cornering yourself and casting close to your feet. This is the easiest method and most reliable. This isn't particularly dangerous to do as Vault allows you to leave the corner whenever you please. Nobody traps baby in a corner. The second method uses any reasonably flat wall or cliff to clump the traps at your feet by clicking a certain distance beyond the wall you're hugging. If you cast too close, one of the traps will pop out to the side, but this isn't always a bad thing if you want to drop a single trap on monsters just beyond the clumped range. With practice, you can drop traps wherever you need them. While the two builds I've covered have different playstyles, you don't need drastically different gear sets to be effective with both. When using Volatile Explosives and Scatter, I equip a two-handed crossbow with Lifesteal. In this case I have Manticore, but I had no problem using Hellrack until I found one I could afford, the chance to root monsters being a nice crutch if you're undergeared. For Monster Power 1, 500 resistances, 4k armor, and 40k plus health is enough to get started as long as you have as close to 3% lifesteal as you can get with enough damage to make use of it. I also recommend 1 or 2 items with life regen and or life on hit to supplement your healing. Keep in mind that if you're using Brooding, you'll get 1% of your max health as life regen. In my case, that's roughly 660 of my 1050 life regen. Going back to the Hellrack, I was using one with life on hit instead until I had enough damage to rely on lifesteal. You'll also notice that I've stacked a lot of physical resistance, and while you don't need quite as much as I have, I'd recommend doing the same when you have the option to. It helps deal with reflect damage as it returns physical damage. I can only begin to describe the shock and hysterical laughter that ensued when I entered Monster Power 5 with 400 resistances, 40-something K health, and dropped Scatter on a reflect damage horde. It's safe to assume that I died instantly. When using Bitter Pill and Echoing Blast, I use Dawn because its built-in attack speed and life on hit synergizes with Bitter Pill, and the stun chance pairs nicely with Thunderball if I use it. It's also incredibly affordable. You can certainly trade it for the faster Calamity or either of the Donetta set, but I wouldn't drop the Quiver in any case. The stat it provides are important for the survivability, as a one-handed crossbow can't give you all of the stats a good Dead Man's Legacy can. I found life on hit to be most effective for me, but with enough damage you can stick with lifesteal. The defensive requirements to enter Monster Power 1 are the same with this setup, but crit chance is more important if you're using Night Stalker, whereas its only function with a two-handed crossbow is more damage for lifesteal. There isn't really a minimum amount that you need in order to work, as the build functions without Night Stalker, but it's rather easy to get 30 plus crit chance, so there's no reason not to. For both sets, bonus Bola Shot damage on the Quiver is ideal, and while I don't currently have either, bonus Spike Trap damage on the chest and or Stone of Jordan can add a considerable amount of damage for tackling elites. Skull Grasp and Mara's Kaleidoscope can also have Spike Trap damage, but they don't come with the 30% bonus damage versus elites that Stone of Jordan has. Likewise, extra discipline on the chest and Quiver to go with the hatred generation I already have is a long-term goal for the build. None of these are particularly important for staying alive, but they are excellent ways to build up damage once you've got a solid tank. To check out my items, check the description box below for the respective d3up.com links. Here's some gameplay of the alternative build featuring Bitter Pill and Echoing Blast while I talk about the strengths and weaknesses of both builds. While I find each to be entirely capable of handling the higher monster power levels, the two-hander lifesteal setup tends to be faster due to a slight edge on damage output. Vault and Smokescreen are typically saved for positional use, while the bulk of your damage comes from volatile explosives and scatter. The one-handed life on hit setup compensates for its slower speed with increased survivability, as the faster attack speed supports a more consistent source of healing and discipline generation. This allows more frequent use of Vault and Smokescreen, which raises their damage output to a similar level as Bitter Pill and Echoing Blast. With a Legacy Natalia set, you can easily match the damage output of a two-hander by spamming Vault and Smokescreen for their damage. Regardless of which build you prefer, Bola Shot is going to be at its best when it takes more than 1 to 2 shots to kill trash. This is because the inherent delay of Bola Shot and Spike Trap puts a significant damper on your farming speed in the lower monster power levels. Higher levels mitigate this by shifting the importance of burst damage to sustained damage. Let me say this again to avoid any confusion. Bola Shot works best in the higher monster power levels, where the larger health pools prevent the initial delay from being a speed bump in efficiency. Don't use Bola Shot on Monster Power 1 if you're looking for the fastest runtimes. If you complain about how slow this build is, don't be surprised when I refer you back to this and kick you in the junk for not listening. As for future guides, I've already begun to receive messages about the creative builds many of you are using, so feel free to send me any builds you'd like me to apply the prosaic treatment to. As long as the build looks fun and isn't too similar to one I already have planned, I'll see about making a guide for it. Of course, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe for more suboptimal goodness.